Salisbury will move the adoption of that of
Okay.
so
Welcome to the council meeting of Tuesday, the 2nd of June, in the year of our Lord, 2020. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and the video will be publicly available on YouTube. Members, could you please remember to speak clearly into your microphones, and can I ask, please, that when you're not speaking, if you could have your microphone or microphones, if you have two devices, turned off and one speaker at a time for clarity, that would be greatly appreciated. I'll just call for any apologies. Are there any apologies? Not that you can see, Robin, I don't think.
No, I haven't received any.
Great, thank you very much. Councillors and staff, before we start the meeting proper, I just have two announcements to make. It is with deep regret that I announced that Councillor and Deputy Mayor Larry Baldock has resigned as Deputy Mayor. I want to thank Larry for his service to the city over many years, and we can be thankful that he will continue to provide this service as a councillor. I also want to thank Larry for the diligent work as Deputy Mayor and for his loyalty and support to me in the first 6 months of my mayoralty. In this time, council has achieved many actions and decisions for the city and our residents. For example, the remediation of the Mauao base track at 12% of the estimated cost, the fostering of cooperative and trusted relationships with iwi and hapu, that again, after many months of inaction and contradictory decisions by the past council, we managed to transfer the title of 11 Mission Street to Ngāi Tamarawaho, a small but highly symbolic gesture that as an organisation we were willing to recognise and do the right thing. We've also achieved a great level of regional and national collaboration with our regional partners and with central government. Our partnerships with neighbouring councils have never been better, and our improved relationships with government ministers and departments have delivered significant infrastructure funding, more than 900 million for key roading improvements in the Tauranga and Western Bay of Plenty, with the high likelihood of more to follow. And all this, of course, has happened during the Whaikari eruption, the escalation of gang violence, and a global pandemic. So Larry, on behalf of us all, I just want to thank you for your loyal and diligent service. Councillors, I'm also delighted to announce that Councillor Tina Salisbury has accepted the appointment of Deputy Mayor with immediate effect. In the short time Tina has been a councillor, she has shown herself to be a hard-working and diligent person with a good grasp of our strategic issues and a good eye for detail. Together with Councillor Yako Arbery, Tina is serving on the Mayoral Task Force for Homelessness, where she has a long and effective background in understanding this critical issue for our city. I trust you will join with me in thanking Larry for his service and congratulating Tina in her role as Deputy Mayor, and offer her your full support. Moving to number 2 now, the public forum. Dr. Morris, welcome to you, sir. I had the pleasure of listening to you speaking at Auckland Council.
Oh, okay.
And on the YouTube video.
Yeah.
And we look forward to hearing what you have to say. So the floor is yours for 10 minutes. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councillors and staff, for giving me this opportunity to speak. I am here representing an organisation called Direct Action Everywhere, or DXE for short. We have a New Zealand chapter. Our ambition is to stop animal agriculture by 2025 worldwide. That's the mandate of DXE. But I'm here for a more modest proposal to Tauranga City Council. What I'm asking them, at a bare minimum, is to adopt the same proposal and policies as the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, which declared a climate emergency, and as part of that, brought in policies to ensure that all the food served at council meetings was plant-based. This is due to the fact that animal agriculture is a major driver of global climate change. According to international research by New Zealand scientists, it's about 23% of global warming potential worldwide. And within New Zealand, according to the Ministry for the Environment figures, it's about 49%. So it's a significant factor in our global climate change crisis. I'm also asking Tauranga City Council to actually go further than Bay of Plenty Regional Council and become part of the C40 Cities initiative, which cities worldwide, including famous places like Los Angeles and Beijing, as well as Auckland, are discussing ways in which they can implement policies that will promote a change from animal-based eating to plant-based eating. I think it's appropriate that this meeting is being held during a global pandemic and the worldwide economic disruption that has gone with this, because one of the main drivers of these kinds of pandemics caused by zoonotic diseases is animal agriculture. We don't know exactly where SARS-CoV-2, the organism responsible for COVID-19, came from, but it is likely that it started in bats and spread to other species. I was just reading in Nature today that it's been discovered to jump to domestic animals, and there is a possibility that it can jump back from animals to people again. So COVID-19 is not the only disease that's been caused by people invading animal habitats, exploiting and enslaving animals, and keeping them in highly unhygienic, unhealthy, and immunocompromised positions where they're pretty much walking culture media. The AIDS pandemic, ongoing, 35 million deaths so far and counting, was caused by humans invading the habitat of our fellow primates, enslaving and eating chimpanzees. The 2009 swine flu pandemic, 300,000 deaths approximately, was traced back through sequencing of the virus to piggeries in the United States and Mexico. And the 1918 so-called Spanish flu pandemic, but misnamed because it was nothing to do with Spain, was actually traced back through isolating the virus, sequencing it to piggeries again in the United States. So animal agriculture is responsible for a great deal of human misery worldwide, as well, of course, as misery to billions of animals. As well as starting pandemics, the slaughterhouse industry is actually spreading this one. There have been several reports in the United States, in Canada and Australia that the slaughterhouse workers are major foci for this disease. And in all these places, these are vulnerable members of the community and now being forced through Trump's executive orders to keep working until they die or infect their community. So it is, again, a human health and public health issue. If we took the short-term effect of methane into account in New Zealand, then the climate change warming potential would be even higher than the 23% worldwide. There are other associated environmental impacts such as habitat destruction, water pollution, topsoil depletion, and the lack of swimmable rivers. In fact, Dr. Mike Joy, late of Massey University, now at Victoria University, has calculated that the dairy industry in particular costs more to clean up the environment than it's actually getting from revenue, which means that in effect, farmers are dole bludgers. So I've been in contact with a plant-based doctors group in the South Island who have been lobbying Nelson Council to adopt the C40's proposal, and including Dr. Mark Craig, a doctor in Auckland, who has managed to reverse several serious diseases such as heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and cancers through diet. A major New Zealand study published in Environmental Health Perspectives this year by Dr. John O'Drew at Otago calculated that if New Zealand went totally plant-based, it would save $26 billion over the lifespan of this present cohort, plus 1.6 million quality of life years. So in conclusion, I would like to propose policies around plant-based eating because it's better for the environment, it's better for human health, and it's better for social justice, because we all know that disasters such as this present pandemic, such as the climate disaster, such as air pollution, always disproportionately affect the poor and vulnerable more. The wealthy can afford to work at home, they can afford Zoom meetings, they can afford well-filtered rooms for air pollution, and they're not having to be exposed to viruses or extremes of temperature. It also goes without saying that it would be better for the animals. In New Zealand alone, every year there are 140 million land animals killed. Now that, in a single year, in a small country, is more than all the human deaths from every war, every gulag, every genocide, and every Holocaust in the 20th century. And it's all for something that we don't need. And those animals are not moderately uncomfortable. They're an absolute hell. They're bred to be genetic freaks, chickens in particular, twisted so that their legs can't stand their weight. And Dr. Temple Grandin, who's an international expert in animal welfare, has found that even in the best managed slaughterhouses, 10% of the slaughters are botched, which means that those animals are in absolute agony when they're dying as well. It's not necessary, and really there's no economic reasons either. It's actually the pandemic caused by animal agriculture is ruining the economy, and plant-based products are actually cheaper. Dr. John Livesey from the Canterbury District Health Board and myself have just submitted a paper to the New Zealand Medical Journal where we found that plant-based foods such as lentils, chickpeas, gluten flour, and other plant-based products are far cheaper than animal products, so the cheapest animal products being offal, which is not usually considered very appetizing. What's necessary, though, is better education of people so that they know how to cook plant products. And that's why I'm calling on the Council to bring policies in place to better promote plant-based eating. Thank you for your time. Thank
you very much, Dr. Morris. We really appreciate you presenting to Tauranga City Council. Councillors, any questions of Dr. Morris? Councillor Clout.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael, for that illuminating presentation. What specific policies and mandate do you think Council has to actually make an effective change as a City Council?
City councils, as I know, don't have the same sort of power as central government, but one thing they can do is they can be an example to others. So, for instance, if all the catering at council, for councillor meetings was plant-based, and I was quite encouraged to see that that was happening at Auckland Council, that would certainly be a start. Council procurement policies, such as the C40 initiative, would be another way. And I know that regional councils have more control over this sort of thing with resource management, but city councils as well, with things like resource consents, could certainly have an effect. But as far as the specifics go, I'm just doing this for further discussion. I just do think that councils as a whole do need to think about climate change, human health, and of course the impact on animals.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. Did you have a supplementary, Councillor Cloud? Councillors, any other questions of Dr. Morris? Michael, I just have one. How many councils other than the Bay of Plenty Regional Council have adopted these practices?
As far as I know, Bay of Plenty Regional Council is the only one, but since it's within the Bay of Plenty, I thought it was appropriate that Tauranga should as well. Auckland doesn't have a de jure policy, but it seems from me, just from observing the sorts of food that was served, that they do have a de facto one. And Auckland Council is another one that we've been talking to, as you're aware.
Tremendous, Michael. Thank you very much for that. Robin, I've just got your message. What would you like to do with that?
I was just thinking we have Mr. Brian Hodge here as a representative of the Trust for the Sydenham Botanic Gardens, and I was wondering whether we should bring that item forward in business so that Mr. Hodge doesn't need to stay for the rest of the meeting. So it would be a change to the order of business if that was, if that suited. And I think we just need to check that the relevant staff are here, but I think they are.
Thank you, Robin. Councillors, with your permission, if we could bring Mr. Hodge forward, that would be appreciated. It does seem very logical. Michael, can I thank you for your time here today, and rest assured we will certainly give it consideration. And personally, what I'll do is talk to Chairman Doug Led with the Bay Plenty Regional Council and see what effect this has had for them.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Bye.
Brian, I see you on screen. Are you able to address us at this time?
I think if we just work through it and we just do it as a change to the order of business, if we work through the agenda, Mayor Temby, so if we go through 3, 4, 5, change the order of business, and then if staff are here, the suggestion would be to take this Sydenham Garden item first as business.
All right, Robin. So we're on to number 3, the acceptance of late items. I don't believe there are any. Confidential business to be transferred into the open. I don't believe there is any. Change the order of business. If we can hear from Mr. Hodge at this point, that does seem logical as discussed.
Good morning, councillors. So thank you for bringing this paper forward to allow Brian to contribute. I'm going to hand over to Robin Scrimshaw that will just intro the paper, and then Brian can tell us a little bit about the Sydenham Botanical Trust. Thank you.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. Hope you can all hear me okay there. So this paper here is about the Sydenham Botanical Park, which is located in Brookfield. We have Brian here from the Trust to speak to the elected members today.
Robin,
yes.
Robin, I'm sorry to interrupt. We can barely hear you. I wonder, can you speak more, closely to a microphone or something?
There we go. Is that better? I'll take out my headphones.
That is much better. Thanks so much.
Okay. So we've got Brian from the Trust here to speak to the elected members today. This paper is in regards to the ongoing governance and the funding options for the Sydenham Botanical Park. So if I just let Brian speak to you all, and then I can come back and answer any questions in regards to a way forward with this park.
Great, thank you, Rob.
Brian, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm quite happy to speak.
Thanks very much, Brian.
Thank you for this opportunity to talk about this paper. As you're aware, that arose from submission made to last year's annual plan and to the Reserve Management Act review. Sydenham Botanic Park is an unusual piece of land in that it's still owned by someone who died in 1973. And as a result of his bequest, Tauranga City Council have become the managers of the land and will continue to be that in perpetuity so long as the Guardian Perpetual Trust is happy with what's going on. The land in question is about 3 hectares in Brookfield. It is adjacent to the Brookfield School. It has a flat piece and then it slopes down to the south to a stormwater pond, which is part of this council's stormwater network. The application or submission was prepared in December, and life may have changed somewhat in the last 4 or 5 months, but the basis for it was that the original group was put together for 5 years and it was now 7 years, and that we were finding it increasingly difficult to get the funds that we needed in an orderly manner to be able to build things. Subsequently to that, we did manage to complete the pergola on the western side along the school frontage. Our suggestion is that we would, in our original submission, was that we should take the councillors on a tour, and that hasn't happened for a variety of reasons, but we would be happy to arrange to do that should that be something to help people consider this matter. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Brian. Councillor, are there any questions of Brian? Larry.
Yeah, I wonder, Brian, if you can, and hi, morning, Brian. Thanks for your long service to the advisory group and the work you've done there. The trust has been, there's two parts, and the fundraising trust and your own volunteers. Can you just speak to the need to sort of refresh the members of the trust, and that was part of the discussion last year, and how a visit might be a really useful way to begin that process?
The original donation of the land to the council happened in about 2002. At that stage, I was a council employee, the group manager of city services, and the Guardian Trust came to the council because the council was the third in the list of beneficiaries of the land by Sydenham, and a trust was established to develop the land. That trust got into difficulties with some of the people who'd been occupying the land and with the scale of their development, and a news organisation was set up 2011, 2012, in which there were two parts. The first part was the funding trust, which has a legal entity, is a charitable trust, has somewhere between 3 and 6 members, and whose function was to raise money by making applications to charitable organisations who grant funds. That's Bay Trust, Lion Foundation, those sorts of organisations. The second group was a group of about 12 people who were established to be both volunteers working in the park and also to provide a community direction as to what to do next. That group's probably reduced to about 8 now, with people leaving the district or getting other things to do, and both groups could do with some recruitment of people. And I'm uncertain as to the protocols of how to do that, because we were all originally appointed by the council, and I assume it's the council's prerogative to replace us or augment us as well.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very good reply.
Thank you very much, Brian. Council, is anything more for Brian?
Yeah, Brian. Hi, Brian. I would really enjoy the opportunity to visit the park. Thank you. I'm just wondering, have the aspirations for the park changed through this time, and what are the aspirations for the park by this group at this time?
Included in the report is the master plan for the development. I don't believe they've changed significantly. There's been some detailed change in the species of trees provided, because some have died and some new ones have been donated. But the layout of having an open green space on the top surface, circled by a path with plantings of subtropical vines on the 2 boundaries, and the sloping south-facing face, and the wetlands area planted predominantly in native species. That's more or less been the scheme for the last 7 or 8 years, and that remains the scheme. So it's really the completion of the eastern boundary and the path, and some work on the areas which are still growing Tradescantia and other nightshade and all the other weeds that accumulate in places like that.
Thank you very much, Brian. Council, is anything further for Brian? Brian, there being nothing, thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming in and presenting to us this morning. I'm not sure if Brian heard that, Robin.
Yes, I did, but
Great, thank you. All right, just wanted to make sure.
Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. Councillors, moving now to item 6, confirmation of the minutes. There is nothing to do there. Declaration of conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest? Thank you. Deputations, presentations and petitions. I'm not aware there are any. Recommendations from other committees. There is a recommendation from the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee from their meeting on the 26th of May. And from Councillor Salisbury, particularly as Deputy Chair of that committee, they would like to move the recommendation. Councillor Salisbury, you're moving this. Can I call for a seconder, please? I'm just going to say thank you, Larry. Much appreciated. Tina, did you want to talk to this at all following your meeting?
No, just that I'm moving that we adopt the recommendation from the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee as outlined.
Great, thank you very much. Larry, did you want to speak to this at all? Thank you. Are there any other comments on this, Councillor? Councillor Robson, you're lit up like a Christmas tree around your box. Did you want to speak?
No, just getting ready to say aye when the motion's put, Your Worship.
Very good. Councillors, I'll put them to you then. All those in favour?
Aye.
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 Any abstentions? Thank you. We're on to item 10, code of conduct. Coral, did you want to speak to that initially?
Yes.
Sorry, excuse me, Mayor Temby. I just thought we were changing the order of business. Although we've heard from Brian, it would be helpful if we dealt with that because he's waiting probably to watch it occur. I thought we had moved that we were changing the order, not just having him speak as a early thing, but I may be wrong.
That would be, I think, preferable to deal with that actual report that was item 10.4, deal with it now while Brian's presentation is fresh in everyone's mind.
Thank you, Robin, and Larry for pointing that out. I beg your pardon.
So if we move to item 10.4 now, it's the next item of business.
Yes, indeed. So there are three recommendations there, Council. Can I have a mover and a seconder for those recommendations, please?
I'd be happy to move it, Mr.
Thank you, Larry. May I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second.
Thank you very much, John. Larry, did you want to speak to the recommendations?
Yeah, I will. Just, I think this is a fantastic park. It's had a bit of history, but it's really well appreciated by the residents out there, and the trust have done, and the volunteers have done a great job over the years with limited funds. It's not easy to raise the funds going forward for some of the capital projects. So I hope we will look at that C resolution, that we would give some assistance there. The reason that trust got established was because back at the end of the GFC as a cost-cutting measure, council decided that they didn't want to spend 30,000 anymore mowing the place, and so they gave it up. And the response from the community was overwhelming, and so we ended up with this group of volunteers taking responsibility and council continuing to fund just the ongoing maintenance. Well, I think it's a really good investment to have a 3-hectare reserve right in the middle of that residential area there, which people really enjoy walking through, and events being held there and so on. So I thoroughly recommend this. I do think a visit would be great if we all could go together rather than one at a time, for those who've never sort of been there and understood how council's involved with it, and a discussion around how to refresh the membership of the volunteer advisory group, as well as look at whether the fundraising trust is a necessary thing ongoing or not, would be very good. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Larry. John, would you like to speak to this as well?
Happy to reserve. I think Larry spoke well to it.
Very good, thank you. Councillors, any other comments on this? I don't see any hands up. John?
No, I think one of the things, I think Larry covered most of the points. I think, though, the idea of this sort of botanic living history, I think is really, really valuable and important. And also it pleases me to see council committing to perhaps a part of the city that doesn't get much. We often talk about the CBD. Indeed, I believe we've wasted millions talking about the CBD. But frequently, if you're not a new growth area, if you're not a greenfield growth area, or you're not the CBD, you are sort of missing in dispatches. I know the member for Welcome Bay, Councillor Bill Granger, is aware that some parts of the city don't get the attention I believe they deserve. All our citizens should be treated equally as much as we can. And I think this is a statement above and beyond a commitment to a botanical garden, horticulture. This is a statement about, you know, thinking about the city as a whole. I'm thoroughly behind it. It's a wonderful, wonderful place.
Very good. Thank you very much, councillors. I'll put this to you then. All those in favour say aye.
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 Against? And any abstentions? Carried. Thank you very much, which leads us back to the item 10 on the business, which is the Code of Conduct. Coral, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So this is the Code of Conduct. It's a revised version that we're putting to you. Hopefully, it's you know, well, you've become quite familiar with it in the last couple of months. I suppose the new things that it does is it introduces a number of new things. Regulatory register in section 9.2. It has a difference between a trivial and a serious breach of the code. And it deals with different types of complaints, and there's a test for materiality. You can decide whether to establish a code of conduct committee or whether you carry on with the council hearing those complaints. So there's been a number of questions flying around, so I appreciate those have come through. So maybe I can answer some of those.
Thank you, Coral. Councillors, I'm sure many of you have questions of Coral, so if I could just see hands up, perhaps I can see you all.
So perhaps if I just state at the beginning that it is your code, so you can add in what you want in terms of your values, and I see that there's been some additional values put forward, and that's totally your choice and up to you. There's been a few recommended changes, just which I'm sure Councillor Morris and Councillor Robson have put forward, and they can speak to those. The idea, I really just want to state, the idea for complaints is that it goes through the mayor first, which is set out in 14.2.1. But if the complaints relate to the mayor or the mayor's initial consideration gets referred to the chief executive, then an independent investigator is brought in. So that I just wanted to kind of clarify that part for you. There are appendices in D and E that hopefully are helpful to you to explain the processes, because it can get a little bit complicated. And I was asked whether you have some flexibility in whether you refer the complaint to the council like you do at the moment, or whether you set up a complaints committee. And yes, you do have that flexibility, and so it's not an and or, it's an and rather than just an or. So my suggested wording, I've got some suggested wording for you, which I can bring up at that time in sections 15, and then it also relates to the appendix, which is the steps, and then appendix E, which is the, you know, the diagram. I've also had some requests, particularly from Councillor Robson, about the protected disclosures. And so my suggestion to that is that you include a paragraph in Appendix B, which is the legislation, and I did email that a bit later this morning to you, so you may not have had a chance to read that. But basically, councillors are considered under the Protected Disclosures Act 2000, which is commonly referred to as the Whistleblowers Act. the definition of an employee in the public sector organisation actually extends to elected members. And so I thought a paragraph about that and a reference back to that policy, which is on our website, would be useful and may or may not meet Councillor Robson's requirements. So I think I'll stop there and I'll let the councillors ask their questions, and hopefully I can answer them for you.
Coral, thank you very much for that. Councillor, questions of Coral? John, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tembi. Coral, I've circulated a couple of emails to my colleagues and to the Chief Executive and obviously yourself. But the first thing that struck me on reading the draft was the absence of some of the key responsibilities of the Chief Executive in section, I think it is 4.2 of the draft, particularly those responsibilities that are in 42.2.2 and 42.3 of the Local Government Act. And specifically, there's one that was in or is in our current code of conduct, because of course we have a current code of conduct, so we're under no pressure to change. And I think that's an important thing to remember here. But a provision of advice to elected members. I mean, just to contextualize that for people who are listening, the machine, as I lovingly call it, has two responsibilities. One is to provide quality advice to elected members, and the other is to execute effectively and efficiently the decisions of elected members. And the new draft seems to miss the line about the provision of advice, which of course effectively is the responsibility of the Chief Executive. And the Local Government Act goes a little bit further and talks about, you know, the rationale for the provision of advice and what the advice is supposed to support. Is there any reason why we couldn't just take the lines from the Local Government Act that would seem appropriate? We're nesting this within much of the Local Government Act. Would that be acceptable or easy?
Look, it's your code of conduct, and you can add in what you like if you feel that that is going to be of value to you and to the public. That's totally doable. Yeah, I'd refer probably to Marty if he has a preference. I think the idea was not to try and recreate all of the local government legislation, but yeah, it's entirely your choice.
Thank you, Coral. Very practical approach, John. Marty, did you want to comment at this stage on that?
Yeah, look, that's fine. To include that from the Local Government Act would be fine.
Thanks, Marty.
Thanks, everyone. Councillors, other questions of Coral? Larry.
Well, just following up on your comments, Coral, about having that and, you know, so before we get to sort of the resolutions, if we can see that, because I think that's the option, is to, I'd like to move that as an amendment or see if it can be incorporated, that we can have a choice depending on the nature of the complaint, whether it goes to an independent or whether council handles it. So we'll look, I assume you've got all that ready there for us and we can see that at the right time. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I'll just check with Robin whether she's got it up, or I can just share my screen at the required time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Coral and Larry. Councillors, any other questions of Coral? Heidi, was that a hand up? Councillor Robson again.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just moving screens here, so I apologise. As you know, we have small laptops and I just want to make sure we get these topics right. I suppose again, Coral, I've made a number of suggestions and really it's just looking for a comment on feasibility, practicality, sort of implications. You know, I think every councillor by nature is a bush lawyer and has a view on what's appropriate and not, but staff advice is always welcome. So specifically, the suggestions I'm making, and it's about whether that's possible rather than a judgment I'm looking for, the inclusion of the EM's oath and the preamble to the Code of Conduct. I think that reminds everybody why we're here. The inclusion of transparency as a principle, I know it's inherent in the Local Government Act, but quite often I feel that the community's not as aware as I believe it should ideally be if we adhere to the spirit of the Local Government Act. The third question I ask is, you, in the recommended preferred Code of Conduct, option 1 in the agenda, we talk a little bit more about sort of the levels, but I just wondered whether there was some value in indicating some defences that may be available. I believe in the past, sometimes, maybe not here, but certainly across the country, Code of Conduct complaints have been, and we already recognise, sometimes frivolous, sometimes politically motivated, sometimes, as the Massey University reports pointed out, of course there's more than one Massey report, they can be a bit chilling. They've been designed to silence. So I just wondered whether defences to certain complaints. So I've been the subject, obviously, of a Code of Conduct complaint for getting legal advice. I mean, it was frivolous, it was thrown out, but it still required time and energy for someone to address. And the final one, and I thank you for that, is the idea that it may be that the nature of politics as the reference point or the starting point for a code may not be ideal. I think currently the idea is everything goes to the mayor, but of course the mayor may have political allegiances, which, and that's really what I'm looking at here. Is there another avenue? My personal feeling is going to the CE and taking it out of the political realm is a good place to start. But is there anything inherent in those 4 issues that could not be included for some reason in a Code of Conduct, rather than us having a big discussion and then the staff at the end advising, actually, we can't do it?
John, thank you. Coral, if this helps you at all,
Yes.
Apropos Councillor Morris's email of, I think it was this morning, it may have been late last night, I'm very happy if its councillors wish that it goes to an independent source for review, that we operate in that way, if that's what council would prefer.
Yes, and those are absolutely your choices for you to make today. So I think I will answer some of your questions and ideas, Councillor Robson, in order, and then I might hand over to Nick to talk about materiality and defence, because he's probably better placed to do that than I am.
Thank you, Coral.
So yes, you can have whatever you want in your code. You can have the oath of declaration, under section 14 of the LGA. It's all about the size and the readability, but we can certainly put that in if you choose to. There is, in your standing orders, I went back and had a look at the principles that you've got there, and of course they're very much aligned to the principles of the Local Government Act. And we can include a principle of transparency, and I've got wording like members will conduct the business of council in an open, transparent and democratically accountable manner. So it's a very simple statement, but may or may not meet your needs. And Councillor Morris has also requested that the principle of freedom of speech, or free speech, which is included in your standing orders, also be included in the Code of Conduct. And look, that's absolutely fine. It's your choice. It's your values. So it's very important that you agree to them. The idea of defences of complaints, I'll refer to Nick, and the idea of the whistleblower legislation, I think we've talked about. In terms of the mayor being the first sort of port of call, if you like, and then I think that was something that was recommended through the template from that Local Government New Zealand. But it really is entirely in your hands how you do that. You have to be comfortable with it. I think the main point is to try and get rid of the potentially trivial complaints from the material, and have a process for doing that. As long as you do that, I would be comfortable. It's just, don't treat every complaint potentially as a very serious complaint. It may not necessarily be. So you need some kind of triage at that point, and that's what the Office of the Auditor General was trying to say. So yes, entirely happy with what you may choose to do. And so Nick may want to talk about materiality. If he's here, I'm sure he's here.
Sure, Coral. Through the Mayor, I would probably add just on the defences. This is a very classical administrative law code. So you know, a complaint is made, it's investigated for whether it's material, which is an exercise of judgment, and then people have a right to have a say. I would suggest it might be quite tricky and may make it very complicated to codify defences, because the circumstances that could be discussed through a code of conduct, as we know, are very broad. It does regulate, I guess, an ideal standard of behaviour and values for councillors. So if we're talking about, I guess, moving it towards a much more formal, codified approach to those issues, I think you'll lose a lot of the flexibility. On the flip side, you do have a process which is driven by procedural fairness and natural justice, and it allows people a chance to have their say. So perhaps that's the only comment I would make, Councillor Robson, to your points, is that I think those ability, or the ability to raise issues, is inbuilt in that process. But I think if we went too far down a codified document, we would risk getting caught up in quite a procedurally complex process.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick. Councillors, any other questions of either Nick or Coral? All right, that being the case, we have the recommendations before you. How would you like to deal with this? Do you want to do it in parts, or do you want to take it as a whole? We obviously need to have decide on D or E. Larry.
Yeah, I think it would be best if we can get it, all together if we can. Otherwise, depending on how much variation we're looking for, but the D or E is going to be amended to an and situation with when we see that on the screen. And I think the other suggested amendments are all sorted and are ready to be looked at. So I think
I can share my screen now.
Thank you, Coral.
Just let me know if what comes up. Can you see it?
Not at the moment, Coral.
Okay.
It's just saying you've started to share your screen.
Okay. Just let me know when it does come up. It says that I'm screen sharing. I'm just wondering if it's on the. I'll just move it over. Can you see it now?
I can't, Coral. I'm just wondering if it's just struggling to actually, boot up, so to speak, configure itself.
Okay.
Coral, would you like me to share from my screen?
I've just got the track changes on a separate document rather than on the Stella, that's all. It says I've started my screen sharing, so maybe it's just taking a moment.
Yeah, at the moment, Coral, we can just see the black screen saying that you have started screen sharing, but no content yet.
Okay, all right.
Is that the Word document that you sent through earlier?
No, it was the actual code of conduct with track changes, but you could put up the one I've shared earlier. That might be better and quicker.
You'll need to stop sharing your screen. There we go.
Okay.
Coral, Raj has just sent you a message about that may help you to share.
Okay, all right, I will do that. My apologies. Has it stopped now?
Yep, stopped now. Would you like to try again, Coral, or do you want me to bring up the Word document?
It might be quicker if you bring up the other Word document.
But that's not the
pretty,
full.
but
That's not the full code. It's just the document that was around earlier.
yes. I could send it to you, Robin. It might be better.
Only 2 more days.
Sorry.
Right, we've got it. Thanks, Rob.
Is that visible to everyone?
Could you just enlarge a little bit, please?
Oh dear, sorry.
Right, great. Thank you very much.
So the values there are free speech and transparency, which you can add. So it's page 20 of your agenda. And Councillor Morris has asked to take out the first sentence in the roles and responsibilities. Oh, and I see that I've said I don't agree with Councillor Morris, but that's entirely your choice if he does. Yes, and so for that one, you would just need to make those changes that were sent out. So that would say, sorry, get to that. That you would just make to 14.2.2, you would remove reference to the mayor or from the mayor after initial consideration. Yep. And then you're on to section 15, where you would add in the chief executive will report to the council that the complaint is found to be material, and a decision will be made by the council on whether the council hears the complaint or is referred to the Code of Conduct Committee. So that's your either or. And then you would then need to change Appendix D and E, that the chief executive would report to the council that the complaint is found to be material, and a decision will be made, on whether it goes to the council or the Code of Conduct. And then there's if you keep going up, Robin, there's a Appendix E would have that changed. And if you keep going up, there's a sentence about there's the oath. If you wanted to, you could add that in to the preamble. If you keep going up, Robin, sorry, there's a transparency, and we've talked about defences to complaints. I think that's covered that. And then the idea of a whistleblower is to add to Appendix B that rather large paragraph. So I think the only thing that we haven't really covered is that 14.2.2 would also require changes to Appendix D and E. Yeah. So I don't know if Councillor Morris wants to speak to that. And that's where his changes.
Councillor Morris, did you want to speak to this?
I'm happy to speak to it during the resolution.
Mayor Temby, I just wonder if, in order to not have to have separate debates on lots of things, I'm interested in why Councillor Morris wants to change the other preamble in the thing. I don't understand why that's something he wants. It would be easier if he could explain it, and then we can sort of move it all together as much as possible. But if he doesn't want to, that's fine.
Councillor Morris, what's your feeling about that? Your microphone is muted.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm happy to oblige. Just in terms of the resolutions that I would be proposing, the first one is under values the free speech. Members will respect the diversity of thought and opinion that are part of a healthy democracy. What that does is it reflects the statement which is also in our standing orders. And suffice it to say, I think that over the last 6 months, I think that that statement would be a great affirmation by council colleagues. And the deletion of the first sentence under 4 is self-explanatory. In terms of the complaint referred to the Mayor, I think in an ideal world, that's how it would work. But I think during the 2019 to 2022 triennium, it would be more appropriate to have that go to an independent, just so there's no politics involved, I think just to keep it clean, to keep it independent. And I'm grateful for the Mayor's comments at the beginning of the meeting in that regard. And that flows into 14.2.2 as well.
If you may allow me just a question to Councillor Morris, Mayor Temby.
Certainly. Thank you, Councillor Baldock.
It's the one under section 4, which you said, Councillor Morris, was self-explanatory, which for me isn't. And obviously I'm not catching it. But why are you concerned about that code of conduct as designed to strengthen good governance statement as wanting to be removed? I don't quite understand that.
It looks like an explanatory note. So I mean, we're not a district or region. We are a city, and so that's sort of crept in there. I'm happy for it to remain in, but it's a bit of a statement which doesn't actually have any use.
Oh well,
if you're happy to have it in there, my recommendation is we leave it in if council accepts that.
Yeah, I'm happy to, so long as we get rid of regional and or district, because it looks just too much like a copy and paste template. Yeah, thanks, Larry.
All right, councillors, are there any other comments, or can I put the recommendation to you of this? So I just need to open my screen up again. Apologies. Can we, Robin, have that off? Thank you very much. Great. I couldn't see any hands up. Is there any other comments before I put the motion to you? Councillor Robson.
Yeah, I'm not certain how we can address the issues I've raised, because can I assume, because some of the things, there's just lines in the document we've seen, but they don't say what's going to happen. So I don't know what wording that I'm being asked to sign off within the code of conduct. Am I missing something? You know, I just wonder whether we're not under pressure here. I think that's one of the important things we should always remember. And I'm just trying to understand whether the proposers, the staff, are going to go away and write something post us making the decision, or whether the staff are proposing to write something and then bring it back to us. So I'm just trying to get clear on the order of things, because it seems difficult to vote on something when you haven't seen the words.
Yeah, Your Worship, maybe, Coral, are you in a position to be able to identify the changes through the document, and assuming they are all agreed to, then council could resolve to adopt the code of conduct.
I mean,
thanks, Marty.
So I'm happy to move a procedural that this lie on the table to the next council meeting and the wording just comes back to us. I think the discussion's been had. We already have a code of conduct, so we're not under pressure. And that avoids the staff trying to write things and get documents up in a hurry. You know, there's no need for a hurry here. We have a council meeting in a couple of days. Would that give staff time? I suppose the question through you, Your Worship, and thank you for your indulgence to the Chief Executive. Would that be rather than us trying to throw things up? And interesting enough, we're all in the room on Thursday, which is almost appropriate in this context.
John, I would certainly support that if others would. I think it's a very practical approach.
I'll move the procedural. If you'll second it, Mayor Temby, then, I mean, we know the process for procedural.
Could I just make a comment before he does?
I just one at a time, please. Yes, I do, John, and answer your question now. No, the procedural motion.
Yeah, we're good.
Procedure for that. Thank you. Councillor Baldock.
I agree with what John's saying. I just think some of what his comments were going a little broader. I thought that was my understanding of it, and he's right. We don't have to adopt it today, but we do have a scheduled standing orders training time where we could also explore if he wants to explore some other things that haven't been fully identified yet. Then Thursday isn't the deadline either. We could be doing it a little bit later. So I wonder if if that's, we don't need to put a time frame for it coming back.
I'd be comfortable with that, Your Worship.
Thank you, and indeed I would be too. So, councillors, if there's no other commentary, I'll put the procedural motion to you. All in favour of the procedural motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Any abstentions? The procedural motion is carried. It now becomes a substantive motion.
No, Your Worship, it just is.
It just is it? Okay, Robin. Coral, thank you very much. All right, in that case, that is carried, and we look forward to this debate on Thursday.
Or whenever.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Council, which leads us on to item 10.2 on your agenda, the Local Government Funding Agency Notice of Special General Meeting. Mohan, I think you're there to talk us through this. Thank you very much.
Mayor Temby, I'll introduce it if that's okay.
Thank you.
So Local Government Funding Agency, as we know, have recommended that there's an increase in the borrowing ratio to 300%, with a sinking link bringing that down to 280% by 30th of June 26. This report is an endorsement of that approach and to provide effectively our approval for staff to attend via proxy at the special general meeting on the 30th of June to vote accordingly to that. So I'll take any questions, and Mohan's available as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Your
Paul.
Worship, at the right time, happy to move.
Thank you, John. Councillors, questions of either Mohan or Paul prior to putting this motion to you? There being no questions, we have a mover. Tina, is that a second?
Yep, I'll second it.
Thank you very much. So John has moved, Tina has seconded. Councillors, I put this to you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? And carried. Thank you very much, which moves us on to 10.3. Amendments to the Traffic and Parking Bylaw 2012. We have a number of staff. Well, Wayne and Brendan, I presume you'll be, or Nick, are you going to introduce this?
Yeah, I can introduce this. Thank you, Mayor Temby. And as you said, there are staff available to through some of this, but this is a report that comes to you with some regularity, not so frequently, so it tends to be voluminous. It is operational, and it outlines changes implemented under the traffic control device rules, which is quite a highly regulated area and needs to be recognised under the bylaw to be able to be enforced. It is often safety driven, often driven by feedback from our community, which we then follow up on. Often safety generated, but not always, which, for instance, applies to the bus stops and markings around those. So that's just sort of a highlight, an outline of what the report is about. It stipulates issues around turning, parking, stopping, bus stops and cycle paths, etc. Some new and some are reverted. So there are two schedules attached to the report. One is sort of a higher level, outlines line item by line item at a high level what it is, and then a second appendix which goes into a little bit more detail about the exact locality. So I'm happy to take any questions or.
Thank you very much, Nick. There may be questions, and there may be specific questions from councillors who have ward responsibilities and specific issues of traffic flows. I have Councillor Baldock firstly. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Temby. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I noticed some changes occurring around Anzac Road and 22nd Ave. And there, I was contacted by a resident recently, and I flicked it through Democracy for you to have a look at. But I just wondered if staff are already aware of the growing problems around 21st and 23rd Avenue with student parking cars all day in very narrow streets. And I know that the resident that approached me said he had seen staff there monitoring the place and so on. I just would like to hear if that's perhaps ready for the next review, where staff are looking into it.
It is one that we are aware of. I couldn't tell you exactly where we're at with the investigation into it, and obviously nothing has been implemented in that latest feedback for this one. So it would be one that we would follow up on for the next report. But as these aren't very frequent, it might be something that we implement, but it then can't be enforced until a bylaw has been passed, which would be after the next time we take this report to council.
Thank you, Nick. Councillors, any other questions of Nick in relation to these recommendations? I don't believe there are any, in which case I'll ask for a mover and a seconder, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to move.
Thank you, Councillor Clout. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Bulldog. Councillor Clout, did you want to speak to this?
Oh, just briefly, thanks to Nick and the team for developing these specific changes, and they come through every few months to us. So thanks very much. Very procedural. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bulldog. Councillor Bulldog, did you want to second or did you want to speak to this? You did not. Okay, thank you very much. Any other councillors would wish to speak to this at all? Thank you, in which case I'll put the motion to you. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Against? Abstentions? And carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Temby. Thank you, councillors.
Yeah, Nick, thank you very much, and to your team for all the work that's gone into this. It was clearly a volume of work, that's for sure, so much appreciated. Council, this moves us through to item 11, unless I've missed a page, as we've done item 10.4. Discussion of late items. I don't believe there are any, which takes us to the public excluded session. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please, to move into the public excluded session?
I'll move
Tina, Councillor Salisbury, thank you. And a seconder, please. Councillor Arbery, thank you very much. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Against, abstentions, and carried. Robin, or I'm not sure who's working the comms today, but if you could now turn off the live stream, please.